when he was asked, is it better to be loved or feared? And Sonny turned around and said, it's better to be feared. I said, no, Sonny, it's better to be loved. Because what happened in our life, what happened is very simple. The fear of the mob was transferred to the fear of the government when the RICO statute came in, when the Bail Reform Act came in, and when the FBI told guys on the street, hey, you either cooperate with us or you're going to get 100 years, 20 years, 30 years, no parole. They started to fear the government more than they feared the mob, because the government said, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to send these guys to jail. We'll give you a new identity. You can start fresh in life. Don't worry about it. They didn't fear the mob as much as they feared the government. A lot of these witnesses, that's why they cooperated, many of them. That's why I said it's better to be loved, because if you love somebody, really love somebody, you're not going to hurt them. Unfortunately, there was a lot more fear on the street than there was love. Everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody's doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, I give God all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving for that. Organized crime is investigated a lot differently than law enforcement normally investigates criminal activity. What I mean is, usually, a crime is committed, law enforcement is called in, they go investigate it, and they look for the perpetrator, right? Not with organized crime, mafia, Cosa Nostra. They investigate the people and then try to find out what crime they're committing. That's how it goes. And so how do they do that? They have surveillance techniques, they follow, they observe, they do all that kind of stuff. They put undercover operations into effect. And all of this is good, police technique, I would say. But without witnesses, it's very, very hard to get convictions. People have to come forward. People have to cooperate. That's how it goes. And, back in the 50s, early 60s, and even before that, it was very, very difficult to get somebody to cooperate because normally they'd get killed. They'd certainly be in danger. It's tough to get them to cooperate. And so there's a guy by the name of Gerald Shur. I'm sure you've heard that name before. He was a federal investigator, organized crime investigator, who happened to hate the mob. And why did he hate the mob? He hated him because his father, who was a dressmaker in Manhattan, was intimidated by some mob guys, and his father hated mob guys. And I don't know who they were exactly, but that picked up by Gerald Shur, and in turn, he hated mob guys. Not a bad reason when you see people intimidating your dad. Obviously, it's going to be something that's going to impact you, affect you. So he becomes a federal investigator, and he goes after organized crime. And he got the idea for witness protection because he realized it was very, very difficult to get people to testify against major mob figures. Now, I had read somewhere, I didn't verify this with my father, but I read somewhere at a time that Gerald started to think about, a witness protection program because of a case that was trying to be built against my father. And the victim initially agreed to testify against my dad, then backed off because he said, Sonny's going to kill me. And that put it in Gerald's head that, hey, we need something. We need a program. We need to be able to protect these guys or they're never going to come forward. And that was a thought in his mind. But it wasn't until 1967 that the program really started to take form. And it took form over a case that happened with Raymond Patriarca. And I'm going to read about it. There's an article about it. And I'll give you my, my 2 cents worth as we go through it. But 1967, Joseph the Animal Barboza, I think I've mentioned him before, he's a made guy, agreed to testify that he had carried out 20 murders for New England's mob boss Raymond Patriarca, after learning that the crime lord had put a $300,000 bounty on his head, for whatever reason it was. Barboza's protectors in the U.S. Marshal Service initially hid him and his family in a lighthouse off the coast of Massachusetts with 16 bodyguards. Now, this is before there was an actual program, but the U.S. Marshals were still in charge of protecting witnesses back then. They didn't have a program, but they had to protect them at that time. The day after they relocated him, A hitman had planned to crash a motorboat loaded with 1,600 pounds of dynamite into the lighthouse, and they found this out. At least 5 hitmen were waiting outside the courthouse when the trial started, and one almost got into the court disguised as a policeman. Barboza's lawyer lost a leg to a car bomb, and the marshals ended up smuggling him to court in a post van, a sports car, a helicopter, and even a fishing boat. It's pretty brazen. They were trying to get this guy. Raymond Patriarca was a powerful guy, New England, and they were trying to get Barboza. And they were very, upfront about it, I would say. Sent a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. After the trial, Barboza and his family were housed along with the U.S. gold reserves in Fort Knox. The only way they thought they could protect Barboza after all of these attempts on his life was to bring him to Fort Knox, where they keep all the gold, and the only place considered sufficiently safe for him at that time. And Shur, who was involved in this, realized they couldn't go on like this. The solution was protection through anonymity, he said. Quote, the best way to keep a witness safe was by moving him away from the danger area to a place where no one knew where he was. This is when the idea of the Witsec started to germinate. After all, he reasoned, they weren't dealing with sophisticated KGB spies, but with mobsters who had often never left New York City in their lives. That's true. I know so many guys that never left New York. Some guys didn't want to fly. They were afraid to get on a plane. I'll never forget when I first started coming out to California, and I loved it out here. I really did. I was in the movie business, and it was like the promised land, right? And there was no real mob guys here, nothing at that time. And I'd go back to New York and I'd say, hey, Michael, how is it in California? I'd say, oh, it's horrible. You don't want to go out there. People are crazy. I didn't want anybody to follow me out there because it was kind of virgin territory for the things that I was doing. But a lot of guys never left the city, never left Brooklyn, never left, the Bronx. This is where they were their entire lives. Amazing. The creation in 1970 of the Witness Protection Program, also known as Witsec or Witness Security, to protect both inside and outside prison, was almost entirely Shur's doing. He created it. He was the mastermind. He was the engineer, the architect. He put it all together. And he made up the rules as he went along. After giving evidence, witnesses had to be moved to a secret location in the U.S., and they were given a new identity. But Shur was worried that if they gave criminals too good a cover, especially a spotless financial history, it would enable them to start a new criminal career. And that's true. So he was afraid, you can wipe out somebody's past, give them a whole new identity. Imagine if some of these guys had, AAA credit, and they had all this great new identity. Who knows what they might have accomplished at that time. Instead, they were given at the very least a new birth certificate, a driving license, and a Social Security card. Their children were even given new school records, but Shur drew the line at upgrading their exam results. In other words, they wouldn't give the kids upgraded exam results. Witnesses had to accept a legal change of name, or they could keep their first name and initials, but could not tell friends or anyone beyond immediate family of their new identity. That was a hard, fast rule. I know my brother was in the program, so I have a little experience with that. You could not do that. If you gave anybody any information like that, they could throw you out of the program. Witnesses could talk on the phone and correspond by mail, but both had to go through their federal handlers, but that was it. They had to let their federal handlers, who was ever handling them at the time, tell them if they were going to call anybody or go through the mail or anything else. Couldn't do anything like that on your own. And this was allegedly for their own protection. And for all the Mafia's pride in its omerta, or court of silence, disaffected members were soon singing like canaries. That's the truth. I always say this. Remember the line in The Bronx Tale with Chaz, Sonny, when he was asked, is it better to be loved or feared? And Sonny turned around and said, it's better to be feared. And when I met with Chaz, I disagreed with him on that. I said, no, Sonny, no, Chaz, rather. It's better to be loved. Because what happened in our life, what happened is very simple. The fear of the mob was transferred to the fear of the government when the RICO statute came in, when the Sentencing Reform Act came in, when the Bail Reform Act came in, and when the FBI told guys on the street, hey, you either cooperate with us or you're going to get 100 years, 20 years, 30 years, no parole. They started to fear the government more than they feared the mob, because the government said, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to send these guys to jail. We'll give you a new identity. You can start fresh in life. Don't worry about it. Now, they didn't fear the mob as much as they feared the government. A lot of these witnesses, that's why they cooperated, many of them. And that's why I said it's better to be loved, because if you love somebody, really love somebody, you're not going to hurt them. Unfortunately, there was a lot more fear on the street than there was love. In early 1970, on average, one mobster a week was seeking witness protection. 4 years later, the annual number had soared to 400. 400 witnesses a year were going into the Witsec program. By the 1980s, it cost Witsec an average of $40,000 each time it relocated a witness. Often, not only wives and children, but also mistresses had to get the same service, as they were obvious targets for retaliation. Shur recalled how one witness asked him to protect his mistress, but not his wife. But he protected both women. Imagine that. The government usually helped towards rent and food for a few years, but there were often extra costs. Aldina Fratiano, alias Jimmy the Weasel, very famous informant at the time, the highest ranking mobster ever to join the program, even weaseled out of officials the cost of his mistress' breast enhancement operation. Another witness had a penile implant funded by the U.S. taxpayer. My gosh. After a psychologist warned that he might not be able to testify unless his self-esteem was restored. I never heard that, but that's a stretch, let me tell you. Shur countered that he set a high bar on who is admitted to the program. I guarantee you that the kind of people we accept are ones where if the guy testified on Monday morning and didn't get protection, he'd be dead by Monday afternoon. I don't know about that. That's kind of dramatic. But as you can see today, I don't think it's certainly not as dangerous as it was back then, but I don't know if it's going to happen that fast. I mean, they exaggerate. Shur's biggest challenge was finding jobs for his clients, many of whom had never done an honest day's work in their lives, because you have to get a job when you're in the program. After you finish testifying, they'll give you some money, but you got to become self-sufficient at some point. He personally met corporation bosses and managed to persuade some to employ former hitmen as delivery drivers. Although witnesses' children were considered the greatest risk of giving the game away, witnesses themselves were sometimes their own worst enemy, even breaking Shur's cardinal rule to never ever return home. It's tough. Can you imagine leaving everything behind? You know the movie My Blue Heaven, when they moved him, out of Brooklyn and to that rural area, and he was like a fish out of water, very, very tough, and I can understand that. One man who did turn the knob of his booby-trapped front door and was blown up. In other words, he went home, he went back to his house, he opened the front door, got blown up. For other witnesses, the main problem was going straight because, as one of Shur's colleagues put it, they simply don't know the direction. Joseph the Animal Barboza, the mobster the feds had tried so hard to protect, moved to California, murdered a fellow drug dealer, and was shot dead within minutes of trying to extort money from a bookmaker, revealing his real identity for added effect. Not very smart. And Marion Mad Dog Pruitt, who was given a new identity in 1979 after testifying about a prison killing, 2 years later went on a crime spree that included murdering his wife and 4 other people and robbing a string of banks to feed his $4,000 a week cocaine habit. Local police were furious. They had never been told of his true identity. Sometimes the feds don't tell the police what's going on, so they don't know. Again, you saw that in My Blue Heaven. The first big star of the protection program was Vincent Fat Vinny Teresa, a 21 Stone Mafia hitman who helped convict 50 gangsters in 19 trials. I remember that. Teresa, who once ran a loan shark company and kept a tank of piranhas in his office, into which he forced late payers' hands, was one of many witnesses who relished their fame and kept giving new mafia names to prosecutors to remain in the limelight. He was happy about being in the program, but imagine having a fish tank and putting somebody's hand in a tank with piranhas in it if they didn't pay a debt. Some guys are very creative, I have to say that. But he didn't want to get out of the program. He enjoyed the fact that he was becoming a star witness. Unbelievable. Eventually, he was relocated to a seaside town, given a fish shop to run. Within weeks, he had to be moved after other fish traders complained that someone was breaking their windows. He was next given a bar in Texas, but one night got very drunk, climbed onto the bar, told everyone who he really was. I mean, people like this, you know, and listen, there's some wacky guys on the street, I got to tell you, but, you know, you put them in the program, they still are who they are. Teresa went on to rack up a string of convictions. He just couldn't stop conning people, Shur said. In the program, they certainly made a few terrible slip-ups, some possibly intentional, such as paging a witness by his real name over an airport loudspeaker, putting another in jail with his sworn enemies, and redirecting posts to witnesses with U.S. Marshal Service witness security as the return address. Not very bright. However, that didn't stop Shur viewing his project as a success. Obviously, the Witsec program was a big success, and some witnesses may have become so depressed in the program that they attempted suicide. I heard that. Very, very tough. You know, again, like a fish out of water. You come out of Brooklyn and you're put in some rural area away from everybody, can't be in contact with anybody. It's like isolation, very, very difficult for some people. But Shur was proud to say that no witness who followed his rules was ever found and killed, and that's true. As far as I know, and as far as what I heard, no one that was in the witness protection program was ever killed while they were in the program. Now, if they went outside of the program and they were finished, that was a different story. So, listen, the Witness Protection Program, along with the RICO Act, the Bail Reform Act, the Sentencing Reform Act, all these additional laws that the government has at their disposal, that was really what brought that life down. It wasn't John Gotti, it wasn't Joe Colombo. You know, a lot of people like to throw that. I mean, look, Gotti was out there, but he didn't bring the mob down. He didn't help in many ways, but he didn't bring the mob down. It was the government's tools and weapons, and that's why I say the government has enough tools and weapons in their arsenal to get somebody legit. You don't frame people. It's not good for anyone, because if they start framing mob guys like they have, they'll frame other people too. You give the government an inch, they'll take a yard, they'll take a mile, and they never give it back. And all it is resulting in taking away our freedoms. So that's it today, though. Very, very interesting, I think, you know, how this program began. I think Gerald Shur has passed away now, but, you know, the program lives on. So that's it for today, my friends. How do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. I mean, God, you know what? I hate turning on the news now. There's never anything good in the news. Domestically, foreign, everything. This country, this world is going crazy. So please be safe, be healthy, and you know I sincerely mean this. God bless every one of you. Yes, see you next time.